Okay, good afternoon, members, and welcome to this meeting of the West Northamptonshire Schools Forum. I'm James Edmonds, Democratic Services Assistant Manager at West Northamptonshire Council, which administers the forum. I'm opening the meeting today as the first substantive item on the agenda is to elect the chair for the year ahead. Before we get to that point, I will go through apologies for absence. We have apologies for absence from Dan York, from Lee Hughes, Melanie Smith, who is head of finance at Peterborough Diocesan Education Trust, was due to substitute for him, but has not joined as yet. Apologies also from Tracy Carter, who is substituted by Kerry Lansbury, the deputy head teacher of Billingbrook School. Also apologies from James Shryan, who is due to be substituted by James Thomas, the head teacher of CE Academy. From Hayley Walker, who is being substituted by Louise Danielchuk. And finally, apologies for absence from Bev Churchman. There are no changes to the forum membership to report to you today. And then secondly, can I invite any forum members present to declare any interest in the nature of the interest which they may have in any of the items under consideration at this meeting? Okay, thank you. In which case, we move on to the election of the Schools Forum Chair for 2025-26. And if I could invite nominations from forum members, please. Okay, and is that seconded? Okay, and are there any other nominations? I see none, in which case, if I could invite forum to approve that Paul Wheeler is appointed chair of the forum for the year ahead. Thank you.
Could I invite nominations for vice chair, or would like to nominate Eliza for vice chair? If anyone would like to second. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, is everyone happy with that? No other? Fine. Okay, thank you very much for that and for your confidence and belief in us. And we will do our best over the next 12 months to come to the right conclusions and make sure you've got all the information you need as a forum to make the decisions that we need to in the year ahead. The first thing then is the minutes of the meeting. I've gone through the minutes.
Sorry, before we go to the minutes, can I just go back now we've elected a chair? James went through all the apologies for today. I would like to put on note, Dan York sent his apologies today, and Dan's school is going through the academisation process and is likely to academise from September onwards. I just wanted to put on record a thanks to Dan. He's been a really active part of Schools Forum for a long time as a maintain head. So I think it's worth just putting on the record and on notes, just to thank you for his commitment. I don't know if Dan has any interest or inclination to apply to join as an academy head teacher or not. I don't know. But as a maintain head, I just wanted to put on record our thanks.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Dan has been very active over the years.
Sorry, Chair. Does that mean there'll be more vacancies for maintained? And will that go out in September? Or when, Dan? Okay. Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Right. Minutes. I've gone through the minutes. Is there any questions or queries on the minutes, or are we happy that they reflected the discussions we had at the previous meeting? Yeah, if we're happy for me to sign them, yeah, I'll do that. Thanks. Thank you. And if I can ask, it's Emily and Beth to take us through the next agenda item on the provisional outturn. And the sorry picture that is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the report outlines the 24-25 provisional outturn and maintained schools balances. On maintained schools balances, which Beth will take you through, Schools Forum are asked to approve the carry forwards of maintained schools balances that exceed 10% that are outlined in Appendix A to the report. So going on to the provisional outturn, Table 1 on page 2 of the report outlines the provisional outturn expenditure for the 24-25 financial year of 192.4 million and an overspend of 18.2 million across all 4 blocks. And this is entirely due to the high needs block demands and cost pressures. It's an adverse movement of 5.4 million from the previous reported position, mainly due to additional demand in placements across the board, resulting from a 25% increase in EHCP requests throughout Q4 and additional costs of education contributions to joint funded packages following a practice-led review on eligible spend for joint funded placements with health and social care. The high needs block overspend at provisional outturn is 20.1 million. Approximately 6 million of this relates to a structural deficit, and that is the additional demand above the funding increase through the high needs national funding formula. The remaining overspend is due to in-year pressures driven by provision for pupils with EHCPs across all provisions, and that's outlined in sections 3.5 to 3.10 in the report. As in previous years, we've seen significant overspends on independent places where demands can't be met in area due to lack of capacity and complexity. The in-year overspend on independent places is 6.4 million, which includes approximately 1.3 million relating to joint funded cases. And of this 1.3 million, approximately half relates to costs of prior year above accrued estimates. Use of independent placements in West Northants is above the regional average, and whilst the previous forecast at P9 indicated a slowdown in growth in this area, the Q4 demand for specialist placements results in a 30% increase in independent special school places over the last year. The early years block provisional outturn is an underspend of 1.6 million, which is a favourable movement of 1.3 million from the previously reported position. The underspend is mainly due to lower than anticipated take-up across the new entitlements, where there is very little data upon which to set the rates. The total underspend is 0.9 million across all entitlements, and of this, 0.7 million relates to the new 0 to 2 entitlements. There are also underspends across the claims-based Disability Access Fund and Inclusion Funds, totalling 0.3 million, and the service are working with the sector to ensure that these funds are accessed going forwards. The central expenditure provisional outturn is an underspend of 0.4 million. The schools block underspend of 0.3 million mainly relates to the dedelegations, which will be carried forwards into 25-26. And finally, there is a negligible variance on the central school services block for the year. So the cumulative DSG balance brought forward at the beginning of the 24-25 financial year was just under 1 million. With the in-year movements and the provisional outturn, the cumulative deficit carried forwards is now at 21.5 million. So I'll pause there and take any questions before we move on to the maintained schools balances.
Any questions from forum members? From Rachel.
Maybe more of a statement than a question around the underspend in the early years block. You know, I don't know what work is going to be. Perhaps I know we've spoken quite a lot about this in the past, and you know, that's money that actually settings that are really struggling and missing out on, and because you have a legal obligation to offset that against other budgets, is there any work that's going on in the future to make sure that we can ensure that, you know, the early years sector gets more on their hourly rates rather than it being offset on other pots?
I'm happy to answer that, but I don't, and you know, Rachel, I don't necessarily have the right answer. We will continue lobbying the DfE. my view, and I know it's a view shared by a number of other officers, it's completely wrong that if there is an overspend overall, we can't look at it in individual pots. The early years allocation that we get should come out to early years providers. That's it. The fact that it's now propping up overspends in other areas, my view is morally wrong. We will keep challenging that, but we cannot override that decision. That's not ours to override. I am going to talk a little bit later around DFE and where we believe things are likely to go. I think we've got an opportunity to really lobby, and hopefully in the autumn, maybe the spring, when new announcements come out, that's one of the areas that they'll address. But I think, you know, I completely agree with your stance, and we do as well. So we will keep lobbying on your behalf to do that.
Is there no other ways?
No, we can't. If there's an overspend overall, the DFE put all of the different blocks back together, and you cannot then. So in early years, there's an underspend. We can't then just flush that money out because it goes to offset the overall overspend. So in one respect, we have to treat the 4 blocks as individual blocks, but in another respect, they treat them as one overall. That doesn't sit right with me. And I know my counterparts across the region are having very similar discussions as well.
One of the reasons that we've ended up with this underspend is because of the time frame over which we have to calculate the rates that we're going to set and the data on which we have to base it, being new with the new entitlements. You know the reasons, we've explained it. But the government have announced that they're going to change the way that they derive our funding from a formula. So instead of it being on a January census for 5 months and then the next January census for the next 7 months, and then adjusted after the end of the year, which it currently is, they're going to change it so it's based on the head counts termly. So it will start to get closer and more reflective of the actual hours that are claimed from us is how we'll be funded. So at some point it should correct itself.
Thank you, Rach. That is, yes, that has been a perennial problem that that we have looked at, and we have talked about whether we can overestimate how much we should put out, and almost inadvertently plan for a bit of a deficit in that year, and to see whether we can do that. There will also be more money coming out, I think, as well. With the amount of money we receive that can be retained centrally, that drops year on year. So we're moving from a 95% disbursement out through to, I think it's 97, 98% over the next 2 years. 96. So it will, more of the money will go out, which hopefully by definition will help correct some of this. But we did talk at the previous forum, and I think it's something we should keep on the table, as whether we can move quicker rather than just year on year reducing it a little bit, even if it does mean that puts pressure onto that budget, but just to get more money out to the providers, because ultimately that's what we need to be doing. The other area that we've looked at in the past and will come around for consultation later in the year is transferring to the high needs block. And when you look at the level of funding pressures on there, the transfer that we do, which impacts schools where we can move 0.5%, that £1.5 million impacts schools a lot, but it's really not making any difference now. You know, we're way beyond that helping and just keeping us ahead afloat. So next time, I think with the consultations, we need to take a long, hard look at whether it's achieving anything at all, and whether we still wish to continue to transfer money away from schools and into the high needs when the pressures just simply aren't getting relieved on that. Is there any other questions at all? Emily and Beth, around that?
Well, not really a question, but just to add to your comment, I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. And I'm conscious that it might not be the right thing for me to say in my position. The high needs block is broken nationally. I'm going to go on and talk about it in the deficit management plan at the moment. But just to give colleagues an idea of the scale at the moment, Emily's talked through where we are now with high needs block. This financial year, we've had over £8 million of requests already come in for additional support this financial year. Of that, £6 million of those requests are to go into independent, non-maintained special schools. and that it's not slowing down, it's actually increasing the level of requests that we're getting. And we are now seeing 3 and 4 year olds where parents go to look at a private special school and who offer them a place and say, I want that £150,000 a year place, please. And here's all the evidence about why you need to provide it. So those numbers are not going to slow down. And I will talk a little bit about that later. But I think what you've just shared there, the £1.5 million could make a real difference on the ground. At the moment, it's not making that difference. It was the right decision last year and the previous years. I think you're right. I think we need a very different look at how that funding could be used. So I'm very, very keen, and we'll support that, and we'll obviously go through the usual consultation process.
Super, thanks, Ben. If there's no more questions, as we said, we will come through. Ben's got an update later on the management plan. So, in fact, I think that's the next agenda item, isn't it, Ben? Would you like to?
I was just going to talk through the maintained
schools
balances. Yeah. That's all right. As part of the DSG outturn, we also have to bring you the schools balances for our maintained schools. We have 5 maintained nursery schools, 59 primary schools, and 1 special maintained school. So Schools Forum decides on the maintained balance control mechanism, which for 24-25 year was 10%, has been for the last couple of years now. And the balances are reported under the various blocks that are shown in the appendix: capital, committed, uncommitted. And that's a kind of an estimate that gives us a feel for the health of our schools, their financial health. We're seeing that if we look at the movement between years, it looks very positive. There's about £1 million overall increase, moving from a total of balances at the end of 23-24 of, sorry, I missed it, 7.8 million, moving to 8.7 million at the end of 24-25. So a £940,000 increase. There's a slight decrease on capital, not huge, a £140,000 decrease. The committed revenue balances, which come under various headings, that's about £500,000 increase. And the uncommitted revenue balances, which have no specific purpose assigned to them, that's about £600,000 increase year on year, and it's 5.5 million overall for those schools. That would suggest a very healthy position, but it's very different when you look individually at balances. We still have schools in deficit, and we did a lot of work trying to see if there was a pattern between those that aren't doing so well and those that are doing very well with their balances. We couldn't see a particular correlation, so we looked at size of school, rurality of school, deprivation levels in schools, and there wasn't a clear piece of data that we could pin to why some schools had high balances and some didn't. We know that a lot of schools have been going through rounds of redundancies and have been working to restructure, so they're all at perhaps different places in their journey to bring themselves into financial health. In paragraph 5.11, you can see there that I've put that there were 8 schools in deficit at the end of 24-25 compared to 9 the previous year. The overall deficit value is about the same, not much difference. But 2 schools make up 78% of that total deficit, and both are nursery schools. We're working with them to try and look at ways to bring their budgets back into balance, but this is a recurring issue with maintained nursery schools. They just have a different funding formula and they always struggle. So schools that are in deficit, they are required to submit a deficit recovery plan to us, and we work with them to monitor that and to see what their plans are to balance over the 3-year plan that they submit to us. So we're in the process of working with them for that. The deficit values ranged from just 0.2% to 5.4% of their budget. And I think the main part of this paper is that 2 of the schools that were that had uncommitted balances and were in a good position were just a bit over the 10% value. I think it's worth saying that academy schools don't go through this kind of process where their balances are ever clawed back. Paul will let me know if I'm wrong.
There is a theoretical with academies. you've got a requirement to hold a minimum of 5% reserves. And there is a theoretical maximum of 20%. So there aren't that many schools in that 20% position. But if there were, the DFE would, when the annual return is put in, would ask what the purpose is. And you have got within your accounts a requirement to state your reserves policy and what you're specifically holding reserves for and why. So there is a potential to have a clawback within the funding agreements, but in reality, it doesn't happen. And those are the guidelines that are currently in force.
So with that in mind, we'll be requesting that the two schools who have over 10%, we have one at 10.2% and one at 12.4%, that Schools Forum approved that we allow the schools to keep that for the coming year.
Okay, so that is, well, first of all, are there any questions on that? And then secondly, that's a vote for our maintained colleague.
Absolutely, absolutely. If those schools have managed to have a surplus, then absolutely they need to keep it, because maybe be one of them schools, I don't know. But you squirrel things away because you need it for the following year. So, yes. So
Yeah.
can I?
You're happy with that?
Unanimously, yes.
Yeah. John? Yeah, yeah. I would just add, it would be worth, absolutely agree with that, and that's been carried unanimously. Might be worth just writing them saying, just make sure that you have plans in place. I'm sure they do.
Yeah, there is a purpose, isn't there? That a principle that you should be spending the funding that you get in year on the pupils you have.
Yeah. So
on the whole.
So yes, so the forums voted they're able to keep those maintained balances, but I think it is worth just encouraging them to set out what the purpose of these savings, if you like, these balances are for.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, can I,
yes, sir, please.
I'm absolutely the right decision, 100%. I think there are two slightly different possibilities in the future. There are schools that will retain and build up a pot of money for a big scheme, a big project or something. That's absolutely appropriate. The concern is when schools are not, exactly as Beth said, you get a pot of money to educate those children that year. If schools are not using it through poor financial management, there are none of those now. I do think we have a role to say, actually, no, that's not acceptable at all. And we have a role to hold them to account and to challenge. These two instances, absolutely agree. I would always err on the side of schools keep their money, because there's a lot to use it for at the moment. But I do think we need that balance between proper forward planning and retaining a nest egg, or really poor financial management, which we should challenge. I think that is our role. So yeah, I think that's the right decision, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, James. Yep, you got that one. So DFG deficit management plan.
Realised my microphone's not on. It was the first report that actually analysed the implementation of the SEND reforms that were brought in 2014. Waiting a long time. So after 10 years, you can see the feedback in that report. I don't know if anybody has had a chance to read it. If there's any insomniacs in the room, it's 160 odd pages of evidence. It's really, really useful, I think. And I'm sad enough to have read it. The system is broken. Nothing that any local area can do is going to fix this system. The only way to address the system at the moment is top-down reform. I think everybody now accepts that. really good intentions in the reforms that came in 2014, but they were not financially backed. And actually what they have done is they have made the SEND system more adversarial than it has ever been. They have pitched councils against schools, schools against academies, and everybody against parents. And it has led to the situation we're in now. And we all know it. We all live and breathe it all the time. The really sad thing for me is there is more money in the system, but not the money that meets the needs. Outcomes for children with additional needs are getting worse. So if we've had reforms that have been here for 10 years that are not working, they are going to bankrupt part of the country. And I'll come and talk about the national picture in a minute. And they are actually leading to worse outcomes for our children. And we've got to do something radically different. And the frustration, and this is my frustration, I know I've talked about it here before, and I know lots of people will hear it here. We've been waiting for an update about what's going to change in the SEND system for a long time. As late as April this year, we were told that those announcements would come in May this year after our local elections. We now understand that the earliest those announcements will come out is in the autumn. We're probably waiting until the spring term. So we're carrying on and we still don't know. And I'm going to talk about what I think some of that looks like. And I'm deliberately starting with the national, and then I'm going to talk about what we're doing locally. I've put in another couple of links there, and these are really dry documents, but I think really, really important. So there's minutes from the Treasury discussion. And my very quick interpretation of that is who's going to own the bill of £6 billion that they overspend nationally? Is it the Treasury, the DfE, or someone else? We don't have sofas with that much down the back of it at the moment. And also the Public Accounts Committee meeting that was specifically about the SEND crisis. And it shows where the challenge is. And it is at the very top table within government at the moment, but there is not an answer. And that's the frustrating thing. So we're all in limbo slightly. James, you're right to go to the next slide. As part of our approach locally, I know I've shared here before, but we are a member of the F40 group. It's not a group you necessarily want to be part of. The F40 group is the 40 lowest funded local authorities in the country. I found they are a really useful group to be part of. They lobby directly to ministers. And we have an opportunity now to have a seat at the table of the executive of the F40, to meet with ministers a couple of times a year and really put our case forwards. And you can see, I'm not going to go through all this. This is the findings of the F40 group, partly based on the national reports, but based on a lot of the work they're doing in the 40 local authorities they support. And I don't think there's any shock there to anybody. Lots of great intentions, but it's failing. It's just not working. And we know demand is going to continue to grow. Some of the failure of those reforms we could never have seen. Things like the impact of COVID, etc. We didn't know that then, obviously, but the system's broken. F40 group, I think, will be helpful for us. And James, on the next slide, I just want to give an illustration, and I hope people can see this. I will send this out to everybody. It's a pretty detailed slide. So this is every local authority in England, and this is the average funding that local authorities receive per child with an EHCP. This is not the one we want to be second in the league table in, but we are second in that league table. We are the second lowest funded local authority area in the country. So we receive about £980 per pupil with an EHCP. Buckinghamshire receive 1,600 quid per child. That's part of the reason why our deficit looks so significant and why we are struggling. And a lot of these factors come from demographic information, they come from historical information. There are opportunities to challenge this, but this is what the formula from the DfE churns out. So we don't want to be at the top of that list. We'd much rather be at the top of other lists, but that's where we are at the moment. So even more case for us to be part of that exec group at the F40 group and really lobby national government. This is not fair, in my opinion. I would say that because I'm sitting here without enough funding. I think it is completely unfair that just over the border, children will get nearly twice as much money as they do if they are born in West Northampton. That doesn't feel right to me at all. So I just wanted to provide that some of the national context, but also some of what we are doing to try and lobby. James, you like to flick to the next one. So you know a lot of this history, but I'll just rattle through it really quickly. Since West Northampton was born, over 70% increase in the HCPs. And you can see our projections, those big scary towers on the right-hand side. They are pretty accurate projections. It isn't slowing down, it's speeding up. We currently have over 1,000 children going through the assessment process now. Live assessments now. So we know about 80% of them will equal new EHCPs. And we're currently getting about 140 requests for statutory assessment every single month. That's not slowing down. It was about 70 when West Northampton was created. It's now 140 a month. And at the moment, one of our challenges is over a third of those come directly from parents, not through schools. That's way out of kilter with where we should be. That's something we know we need to address. So some of the context, like, so we know part of the challenge around our funding, and it's only a small part, but it is a factor, is historically there has been under-identification across Northamptonshire. So we've always been slightly lower in terms of our EHCP percentage of cohort and our SEND support cohort. Those numbers do have a contributory factor, a small one, into allocations. That's being addressed at the moment. We know there's been a really inconsistent approach for a long time. That's something we are addressing. We also know as a council that the data that we have collected and held, and some of the data that we have used to forecast and project, just hasn't been good enough. So we are putting that right with investment in new systems, lots of training and lots of additional staff. So we now I have a lot more confidence now on the projections that we are putting forward around demand than I ever have, because we've really got to teeth with some of the data. And I'm going to go in a bit more detail around some of that later. We also have some capital funding pressures. Again, historic issues. We've already created over 600 specialist places. We could double or treble that and we'd fill them in on day one. We know that's not the answer, but it is part of the answer. The challenge we have is everywhere is full, as it is just over every border we look. I know you know all of this context. And then what I'm going to talk through in terms of our plan really follows good practice from Safety Valve and Delivering Better Value. And those are two schemes that central government brought in for those councils that were really, really overspent. And there are some councils that are looking at hundreds of millions of pounds overspend already. So everything that we're doing now, which I'll talk you through, is in line with that good practice nationally to try and mitigate our overspends in our DSG. Thanks, James. So actually, before I read through that, I'm just going to do the semantic bit. When we first started talking about this, we were talking about a DSG recovery plan. We are not talking about a DSG recovery plan. We are talking about a deficit management plan. And there is some semantics in that, but it's really important. That's what the DFE are talking about now as well. We are not going to try and put a plan together that says we are going to take all that 20-odd million quid out, because we know what the demand's going to happen and we know where our funding is going to go. We're not going to do that. The only way we could do that is by taking provision away from children and schools. We are not willing to do it. What we are going to do is try and mitigate against more and more overspend, because we still have that duty to protect the public purse. We've got to do that bit. So what we've done, big picture stuff, massively improved governance within the council. It was not good enough. We now have SEND funding panel, meets every Friday. I'll be honest, it's the bane of my life at the moment, because it takes me 3 hours to chair it every Friday and it takes me about 4 hours to read the paperwork on a Thursday night. We have between 30 and 50 applications a week. The only people that will make decisions about any funding is either me, our Director of Children's Services, or our Head of SEND, if I can't make that meeting. Really tight application process. We've got partners in the room that look at any requests around social care and health, etc., and real rigour and consistency in that decision making now, which we are able to track, which is helping us. We will also have from this September coming a placement panel. So really early in the request for assessment, we will identify very early, based on a level of need, what types of placement we are going to consult with. Hopefully that will start to reduce children with very low level need immediately us getting requests to go straight to independent non-maintains. We've got to try and address that quickly and get children into more mainstream or more units when we can. And we now have an oversight board that's chaired by our Director of Children's Services that looks at all of the money. So everything we spend internally and through DSG, really detailed meeting once a month where we go through all of our performance reporting and our finance reporting. So there's a real rigour been brought in the last 12 months, which is making a difference, I believe. And Emily and Beth obviously are a really key part of that. You know a lot of the background that I've talked about before. Over 30 additional roles in the council, really starting to make a difference now. And Louisa Jones was going to be with us as our new head of SEND delivering this. She's actually at the SENCO conference today. We've had about 85 people in there overall today, and really successful day from the feedback at lunchtime so far. 2 new case management systems. That might sound strange. It's not. They do slightly different things. So Liquid Logic will be the new system we will have in place from September. That will align with social care in terms of children's social care and adult social care. So we will be able to track, one child will have one system. We'll be able to track their needs all the way through, particularly around that transition into adulthood. We've got one record of children, and it's a much better system to track decision making and make sure provision is right. And Jardu is using AI. It's us getting into the AI world first. Jardu is the system we will use to start that statutory assessment process, and it will automate and massively speed up our communication, which has been dire for a long time, with parents, with partners around that whole consultation process, all advices that we need. The training for staff happens over the summer holidays. We're testing it now. That goes live from September as well. So those things will start to make a real difference. And you can see some of the other bits I've put in there around training. We have a new family help strategy, which will really address some of that early identification, meeting early need, which is we are making sure it runs alongside our wider SEND improvement programme. Okay, James, to go on. So wider SEND programme, this is not the council, this is all partners locally. So there are school and college representatives on our board, and obviously health and social care. We have our parent forum there, we have the Department for Education, NHS England, and we have an independent chair, Mrunal Sisodia, who is recognised as one of the best SEND leaders in the country. He is a parent of a child with complex needs. He won an MBE recently for his services to special educational needs. He is brilliant, and he is holding us to account and driving us really hard. A lot of the focus on that is our local area inspection. That is not the only focus at all. It is about driving improvements for children and young people. That has changed a lot of what we do. And some of this is quite dry, but it's important. That board has just signed off a joint strategic needs assessment, which looks at that holistic need of a child, not broken down needs. My example I always use, can you tell me of our children that are being suspended or excluded from school, who of them are on an ASD diagnosis waiting list? Because I can tell you why they're being excluded from school, because their needs haven't been met, diagnosed or met yet. We are now able to start to do that and really challenge where those blockages are in the system. And a joint commissioning strategy, which is really important. That's how we will use our resources as a system. That's health, social care, education, to really meet needs better. Some of that will be around creating new school places. Some of that will be around designing a new youth offer, new family hubs, etc., to meet needs in a different way. And I've mentioned the 600 specialist places there, and a new offer around speech, language and communication needs from the start of next academic year. So there's lots going on in the background. Just think it's important to talk about that as we're talking about the overall picture of the SEND programme. Deficit management plan. So what the purpose of this, I've put up, there are 3 reasons that we're doing this. We have to try and identify why. And as I've said, we've got that granularity now. I've shared some examples already. We know where the pressure's coming from. We know where the big pressure points are as well. And it won't probably be a surprise to lots of people. Lots of requests for children coming into statutory school. Lots of requests transfer from 6 to 7. Lots of requests in year 9 and 10. That's what we're seeing. Probably not a surprise to anybody, but we've got the evidence behind that now, so we are able to do something different. We're able to support and challenge as well where things we believe are not right. We need to try and identify mitigations, which I'm going to rattle through in a moment, to try and reduce those future commitments. And we want to provide assurance, obviously through the council, but also to Schools Forum, about what we are doing to try and mitigate all of those pressures. What we've done with the plan, we've identified 4 main areas of work. First one is literally line by line review of high need spending. Are we coding things in the right place? Are we attributing spend to the right place? Can we benchmark against our statistical, our geographical, our national neighbours? Are we in line? Are we where we should be based on the needs profile we have? Right the way down to average costs per nursery place, maintained school place, SEND unit, independent maintains. We've done all that benchmarking work, and it's given us a clear steer of what we really need to focus on and tackle. That demand and sufficiency analysis I've talked a bit around here already. That's how we identify where the demand is geographically and which areas of need that's in, and how are we creating sufficient places to meet that need locally. The way in which we commission, And then the last one is the systems and processes, which I touched on really briefly. I'm just going to take through a couple of bits that we're doing underneath, and then I'll talk to you about how we'll bring all this together. So within that project, I talked about the top one, review of the high needs block. We've already consulted around reviewing targeted SEND funding. We've got that consultation's been out. We've had some brilliant feedback. We will bring proposals forward about exactly how we use targeted SEND funding in the future. There are some different ways to do it. We will get more bang for our bucks, I believe. We have to look at notional refund policy. We know we've got to do that. We will consult and look at that, about the impact of that financially, but also obviously the impact on schools and on children and young people. We have got a real area to focus on around post-16. I think it's an area that's been massively undeveloped and managed within the council. There is some phenomenal practice out there. I'm not just looking at Thomas because he's now looking at me, but there is some absolutely stunning practice out there. There are also young people falling through the gaps. So we've got to do something differently. I have no doubt we still have got young people that we think have an EHCP who are probably in work, and we haven't ceased that plan. So we need to do that exercise to really clean down what we know we have and to increase those supported internship, apprenticeship type employment opportunities locally. We've got a whole programme of work around that. We will then do through that review two other really key things, and I think they're reasonably straightforward. Descriptor, we will look at where our big costs are. We will look at if there's anything we can do to address those really big high placement costs. We will also look at our low costs. So where do we spend a very small amount of money from high needs, but we spend it with lots and lots and lots of children or young people, and could we do that differently? I think a lot of people miss that one. I think that one's really important. We might save lots and lots of little bits which cumulatively actually make a difference. And I've listed there some of the actions we've already taken that feed into those. Carry on, Jane. So the second one area, and I'm trying to just outline all of these projects that sit underneath to hopefully give some assurance of the level of work that we're doing, and then I'll explain how we'll report those at the end. So Louisa with Senkos this afternoon to go through our sufficiency plan, the evidence we have, the data we have that will inform where we need places in the future. Now I have confidence in that because it's based on real data. It's not based on the shaky information we had before, and it does look different. That will make us a huge difference because we'll all have that clarity about the future. It also addresses the issue where we did write out to schools asking for expressions of interest based on a level of funding we believed we had that we then didn't receive from the DFE, which is very frustrating. We've addressed that. That conversation will quickly move forward, that how we create more SEND units, AP units and special school places if need be. You can see the other key projects that we're looking at that look at how we meet those needs really quickly and early. So our specialist teachers doing a lot of this work, looking at how we identify those needs, send support stage rather than waiting for EHCPs. Okay, to go on, James. Commissioning. So the process is an activity. How do we commission? How do we identify need? How do we then use that to plan what we need? How do we then use that to hold people to account and then apply the learning in a cyclical process? We can improve that. We've just reinforced our commissioning service and we've moved it into one big service within the council. So all of our commissioning around adults, all of our commissioning for public health and our commissioning for children is all part of the same big service now. So they have some resilience and some expertise to share across the piece. Really confident that will make a big difference there. And part of that is around robust commissioning frameworks, not us being told how much we're going to pay, us having an upfront decision, dialogue that says we've got this level of need and this is the resource that comes with it, gives us that control with that market. That will be tough, but it's the right way to go. And we have a consultation out at the moment around a framework around unregistered alternative providers. We know we are challenged when we use unregistered providers. We know they are an absolute necessity in the local market. So what we want is a framework that gives us that rigor and that assurance around safeguarding and practice, etc., but also gives us the ability to determine resource and cost, not be held to account and told in some instances we are going to pay more for unregistered providers than we would for a special school. That's not right. So we need to take control of that rather than be reactive. And you can see the things that we've already done there at the end. And then last area, James, and then I'll sum up. This is really dry, but I've touched on some of it already. The improved systems internally will make a phenomenal difference. What they will mean is that every Monday morning I will know, because we'll have automated reports, exact numbers broken down: primary, secondary, early years, post 16, every category of need, where they are, average costs, etc. It will give us that informed position that we've never had, frankly. Those systems will make a massive difference. They will help us forecast better. They will also help us track our young people better. So not just financially, but in terms of meeting needs. That's the last one, and then there's a summary at the end. So I think everyone got a slight bit of frustration in my voice at the beginning. We don't know where we are at the moment with policy changes. We also don't know where we are with the expectation from the DfE about us completing deficit management plans. There is no guidance from the DfE at the moment. There still is some on their website, but the officers at the DfE don't actually agree with the guidance that's on the website since the Education Skills Funding Agency was absorbed. So at the moment, the advice from the DfE is do exactly what you're doing. Manage it internally as a budget, as you would do. Keep Schools Forum and keep partners engaged. Don't do anything more because you're doing the right things at the moment. That's the advice we've got. We will continue to take the real details. So every project I've put there, we have pounds and pence against internally and we track internally. We will keep doing that through our normal budget management process as a council. And when we go to set targets and our budgets for future years, we go through a star chamber process every single budget. We present those to our elected members. We go through a series of challenge, and then we set those budgets. For the first time this year, we will also set targets on those 4 key areas that I've talked about for the DSG as part of this deficit management plan. And that process starts in September, October time. And by the time we get to February, we will have a formal budget that the council sets that will include DSG, and then we'll bring the exact numbers back through Forum then. We've got to go through our own internal processes first. So we'll keep doing that. So when I come back regularly, what I will start to bring is those 4 big ticket areas and the mitigations that we believe in a pounds and pence term that we can achieve. And then we will track how well we are achieving every single one of those once we've gone through the formal process. And obviously, we'll carry on with our wider sort of programme of work around improvement. And we'll carry on working with regional, national leaders of SEN to try and identify those areas, because we're all tackling this, we're all doing similar things. If there's anything we can bring into West Northants, we will. I'm certainly not proud enough to beg, borrow or steal from other areas that have got something right. So that's what we're proposing we keep doing. I find this frustrating that I'm not able to do more. Part of that is because I don't know where we're going in terms of policy direction or guidance around what we need to do around the DSG. It's so up in the air at the moment. What I don't want to do is go through hours and hours of work to then take everyone here through financial projections that we're just never going to look at again in the future. So I want that clarity about expectations on us as a council and a schools forum, which we will have in those timescales. Okay, I'm conscious I've gone through a lot of detail in there, but I wanted to try and give an overview and the assurance of everything that's happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, any questions first for Ben? Please.
Hi Ben, thanks for that. A lot of projects on there, which I would probably argue is a programme of work. Do you have the capacity within your team currently to deliver them projects?
That's a really good question. So that project and programme management, the reason we've structured it in that way, I've got four programmes that have a number of projects underneath. That is being managed by one person and me and these amazing people who do all the hard work in the background. The capacity to deliver those is a real challenge, but I wouldn't have put them up there if I didn't think we could do them. So some of them are very desktop. Some of them are a lot more embedded in terms of that partnership work. Every one of those, we have made that commitment internally to do. So yes, we will do it. But it's a good question. It's tough. There's a lot of work in it. And that's why those timescales, I believe they're realistic to have pounds and pence put against every single one of those. Okay.
Would we be able to have some information around alternative provision? I know you've got 600 places, but it'd be good to know where they are in West Northants.
Yeah, Eli's very happy to go through that. And outside of here, you know, there's lots of work going on around what alternative provision looks like, joint commissioning approaches, etc. I'm very keen. What I want to do is incentivise reintegration from APs. What we've seen is children go to AP and it becomes a destination, not part of a route back into mainstream. That's what we've got to change.
I had a few points. I made some notes through that. I think that information was really, really useful. I really welcome the liquid logic issue, because I think for our age group, that link with adult social care is really, really, what we've noticed is that there is a gap. And to get them into the right place for that young person can sometimes be a challenge. I had a question around the SEN panel, and it was around whether we have the confidence that the representatives on that SEN panel can make informed decisions around all of the different sectors. So for example, I'm talking post-16, and then whether there's actually something that we could do to help you in that quest, and talk to you about our provision, and to ensure that kind of those decisions are being informed. We don't submit many requests for statutory assessments, but when we do, we are conscious as to who is on that panel. And I think that's important because at post-16, you mentioned outcomes, and I don't know exactly what you were meaning by outcomes, but the outcomes for young people with EHCPs and high needs in our college is slightly above their peers. So maybe there are lessons that we could share, experiences that we could share about how our vocational programmes kind of tailor that support. And the last thing I noted was around Generation Alpha. So we're doing some work preparing, not for this coming September, but the following September, where we are going to be experiencing our first wave of Generation Alpha. And we are looking at the characteristics of that particular generation. So we're trying to prepare our teachers for the characteristics of a generation, maybe not a diagnosis or a behaviour that may have previously been seen as a kind of a learning difficulty. So I was just wondering whether we could actually think about that a little bit more across the sectors to try and actually understand each generation and what their characteristics are. And it might actually help reduce some of the requests for the assessments that are maybe based on behaviours. So I just thought I'd throw those out there. So I hope that was useful. And I'll switch my microphone off now.
Jack, can I Thomas, your input is always really useful. I know this is slightly so. We have, as part of our overall programme, we have a group looking around preparation for adulthood, which I know you've been a really active part of, and I know you sent apologies earlier. We had a conversation earlier with partners around exactly how we do that work of tracking back to year 9 and 14-year-olds and that transition and making transition better all the way through. One of the actions from that group is we need to set up meetings with 2 main colleges locally, and I was out in Moulton last week and they're really up for this as well, and a number of other providers in the post-16 world and employers. And we need to be really talking about that throughput for young people from a really young age. And we've already got 2 conferences we will hold in October with employers to try and encourage employers more supported internships, employment opportunity apprenticeships, etc. And Thomas, I'd love you to be involved in that. So I'll have that conversation outside with yourselves. And we're, in fact, Councillor Shaw and I are going to Northampton Saints Foundation tomorrow. It's their awards evening, and Saints Foundation are really keen to be part of that conversation as well. So I think I agree with your comments, and I will definitely pick that up outside of here.
Thank you. So any more questions there? Rachel.
Sorry, Ben, how you were saying that the majority of RSAs are coming from parents. Is that did you say that?
So the RSA request, about just over a third are coming in from parents here, which is far higher than in most places.
Right, okay.
So 2/3 come through schools or providers, about a third come to us direct from parents. I want to get that down to 10-15%. It's too high. And typically, this is a generalized statement. It's parents say, I don't have the confidence in the people currently working with them. Why would I ask them to help me? Now that's generalized statement, but that's what we're seeing too much of at the moment.
I guess to contribute to that, I think what I'm seeing in our industry, I don't know whether it's the sector or in our sector, is perhaps in a bit of a social media driven world, parents are lacking parental skills. And I think this is where family hubs need to
Yes.
underpin that support.
Yeah.
And I think that maybe, I know it's a very new thing, but maybe there's a link up with early years providers that could happen there too, which hasn't happened as of yet, that I think is probably vital, because a lot of our support that we're offering in our setting is for parents, and even to the point of confidence around weaning. You know, the health visiting team are stretched. There's not enough of that really kind of early support, even 0 to 9 months, where babies are coming into my settings at 9 months old and haven't got the feeding skills, haven't been weaned, and you know, still not on solids yet at that age. So I really think that there's a gap in that, and parental misunderstanding of need as well. And I know I'm hopefully going to be working with Joe about OAP, but I do think that's something that's really important to look at as well.
Gone quickly. Just for the minute, that wasn't Rachel calling me an OAP, by the way. I want to just put that on record, although she may well have called me things like that in the past. That's our ordinarily available provision. And Joe Lady referred to as the leader of our specialist SEND teacher team, who one of the 30 odd people we brought in, really driving, this is what good practice looks like. This is what should be ordinarily available for every single pupil. And we start that as early as possible, and that goes all the way through, right, and into post-16 as well. I think your comments around the join up around family help, etc., absolutely right. We know, and we do know, there's a social media world out there that says, if this is what you want, here are the letters you need to send, and this is how to get it. It's really dangerous. And we also know that there are so many parents out there that are really struggling, that need support, that need help, whether that be through groups, whether that be individuals, and that we do see the impact of that on children. And that's typically in your sector, I know, but also in that year 6, 7 transition, what we see time and time again is parents go to their wonderful little protective primary school where every child knows everyone and get a head teacher like Eliza that knows every children's name. And then they go and look at the secondary school, which is enormous, and they get scared and they get worried about that transition point. I think we can address that. We collectively can address that. And there are really simple ways of doing that. You know, starting transitions really early, doing that confidence building. That's quite often what we're seeing as some of those challenges. And that's when we get back to, no, we're not going to issue an EHCP there, or no, we're not going to say yes to that really expensive independent school place. And then we go to tribunal, we spend money on that tribunal, and then we lose the tribunal. So we've got to do something around building that confidence. For me, the only way we do that is we start that transition work much earlier. And there are a couple of secondary schools that are already piloting some things around that, which I'll happily bring back in terms of the impact of that through this group.
Thank you. Rachel?
Sorry, can I just add back? I actually don't think it's necessarily a financial thing as well. The makeup of my families who are still struggling with parental support actually is because they're alienate, you know, they've moved away from family, or they don't have any support network around them. So it's not actually, in my experience, necessarily a deprived family, or I think it's, you know, generationally, the support is just not there for families now. And, you know, grandparents were a big influence a long time ago, and they're just not involved at all. So just that's the kind of sort of, yeah.
Sorry, Louise, go on. Sorry.
I just wanted to add in about the third sector, that there's a lot that can be done by the third sector here. So I know that the family hubs are having huge conversations with people, but I think some of the conversations that we're having here about the challenges that we're seeing with, you know, referrals coming through that aren't appropriate, you know, if we could engage with the third sector and say, look, don't just tell people to put through a referral, go and speak to the people that, you know, are there to support you, and we can walk with you. You know, the charity that we run, we're seeing so many people coming in and asking for the help, and we'll get them to come to nursery and speak to them, because that's the fortunate position we're in. But there will be so many other organisations that haven't got that. But by engaging with people like you're obviously doing, we can hopefully help as a whole system.
That leads me on to something that I was going to say with the organisation you've just mentioned, there being charity. So I think a massive part of a missing piece is communication. And I think it's lack of education from a younger age. And like you've just pointed out, you've not got the generations to pass that down anymore. Is there nothing in place, like within terms of a middle body, stopping them from going to the HCP? Because it's just a case of listening and feeding back actual intellect. So to whether or not there's further sources to who you know, or to whether or not something could be grown from it. Like, for example, at first there was Raging Bulls, but I've managed to speak to them, but the West Northants Send Action Group, incredibly intelligent now because of what they've been through. So all it would be a case of is, even if we was to incorporate AI, for instance, going through a series of questions to identify, actually, you don't need an EHCP, you just need to go here, X, Y, Z. And that's, yeah, thank you.
I think, sorry, just
Go ahead.
from our point of view, I think the fear that we get with parents, a lot of our children in primary schools go all the way through without having an EHCP, and we're able to support their needs. And it's that panic, like Ben said, when they go to look at the secondary providers, and we're saying, but they don't need it. But they're saying, but when they get there, they're not going to have the support that they need. So it's that conversation between the next schools that they're going to and those schools having an understanding of what that need can look like in their setting, rather than having an EHCP attached to it. And that's the work, big piece of work that you're doing anyway, isn't it?
I think a massive part to play, and correct me if I'm wrong, going from lower, middle, upper to then splitting it down the middle. Personally, I think it was a mistake. I think it was the easing them into adulthood, so to speak. You're going from talking about butterflies and fairies to sex, you know, like it's a big jump. So, and you'll find that they're trying to keep up with the older ones as well. And it's, yeah, I just think there's lack of education in the education system. But yeah.
Just a couple of quick points in response. Voluntary sector, third sector, absolutely critical. I'm really heavily involved in the development of family help strategy, which includes family hubs, but it's not just family hubs. They are, and we have got a brilliant, really vibrant third sector locally. The bit I wanted to really come back to, I think it was partly Rachel and Louise's comment. One of my biggest concerns doing this job is I don't speak to head teachers about pedagogy and teaching. I talk to head teachers about family support and mental health support and social care, and occasionally a boiler that's broken down. Not the job I came in to do at all. And what I am really concerned about, and I keep sometimes making myself more unpopular, challenging backs, we need to equip and allow our teachers to teach, and not expect our teachers to be the fourth emergency services and to pick up everything. And I do think there has been a shift, whether that be in some of the social mental health support, social care, and sometimes health, that things get pushed back more and more and more on schools. And I am trying to defend some of that because I think it has gone a bit too far. So I am conscious that everyone around this table who leads schools or providers in different ways will not be doing the job they trained for, that they signed up for. It will now have about 10 other things on it, and that is putting more and more pressure on our schools. Is it the right place to address some of these things in school? Absolutely. Should it be done by a head teacher or a SENCO? Probably not. It should be done, whether it be through third sector, whether it be through working through local partnerships. But I am very conscious of that push on schools do more and more and more. And my favourite challenge back is when lots of people tell us children spend all their time in schools. Rubbish. They spend about 15% of their life in schools. The rest of it they spend in communities. That's where we've got to address a lot of these issues. And that's where we start to pick up the family issue and the child issue together. So on a conscious, we've gone way off DSG and into a broader sort of societal discussion, but a healthy one. But I think that challenge and the join up is really healthy, that everybody is aware of that in the room.
Thank you. Thanks, man. As you say, we are drifting away from the topic we started with. So I have got one question for you finally. We spent the last 2 years looking at high needs. We've put a lot of time and effort into restructuring, and moving into bandings, which other than in the further education sector is complete. It doesn't seem to have solved much of a problem. We've got more capacity going in with the special schools. So could you just give us a brief indication of, we're looking at and we've talked about a national picture. We've also talked about our local picture and the accelerating deficit that's caused and not necessarily improving meeting the needs, but hopefully you can show us that we have. But can you show us the impact of the last 2 years' work and whether you're confident that with the plans we've got in place, that they will address as far as we can. We can't do anything about the funding, but we'll address as far as we can the needs of the children that we have that perhaps the last 2 years hasn't. So that's the main part, but including in that, can we also talk about, just briefly, we are now close to the SEND sufficiency, but we've had a 12-month hiatus from when we initially asked to put expressions of interest to put capacity in, and how within these work streams we're moving forward with that, because we haven't put that capacity in 12 months. Okay.
Yeah, Paul, I think there were two questions. The first question was about confidence. And if you asked me that question last year, I would have tried to convince you I was confident, but I wouldn't have been, because I wasn't. And a lot of that was around the evidence that we were making our assumptions and our forecasts on. And I did not have the confidence of it at all. So fast forward to now, I now have a draft sufficiency strategy on my screen, which is based in really hard evidence and comes up with some really logical, sensible forecasts and projections that I have a lot of confidence in. It will go through an internal process to be signed off ultimately by our SEND board, and then I'll share that with everybody. And as we've said before, I know we said this in mainstream, and the work that Shazzy has led around mainstream over the last couple of years has been phenomenal. We don't have a sufficiency issue now. We had a massive one a couple of years ago. We will publish all of those sufficiency plans as soon, and every time we update them, we'll share them, because they're not ours, they're all of ours, and they'll help. So I do have a lot more confidence now, and I have confidence in the people that are leading the work behind the scenes, because they have the experience, the knowledge and the skills to do it. And one of those people, and it's terrible because she's not in the room, but Louisa's starting, we've never had a head of SEND. We had a head of SEND start in January. Louisa challenged the sufficiency plan that she had inherited from her predecessors, and that data has to come from the EHCP team. And she said, stop, I'm not willing to put my name to this because I need to get into the weeds. She has some really good work. Shazia and Louisa and other colleagues. I have real assurance of where that's going now, and that it's based in fact. So that's the first bit of the conversation. Link back to the second bit, we've been trying to do something different around the AP and the SEND units. So we wrote out for expressions of interest a year ago. We've had a couple of sessions since with all of those schools and all the mats that put in those expressions of interest. At that time, we had the best data we had and we were going to go on it. What we realised is that would be dangerous because we could have quite easily built a white elephant that we'd never fill. So we had to pause then. At the time, we were also believed through all of our forecasting, through all the work we do with the DFE, we would have an element of capital funding now that we would be able to then invest into those schools to make things happen. We're not going to get that capital funding for 2 years. And we are not in a position as a council to say we're just going to go and borrow X millions of pounds to invest in power. We can't do that at the moment. So we've got to take a slightly more pragmatic approach to how we do that, which is really frustrating. And I know it's frustrated a number of schools. As I said, we have written to those schools. We've met, we've had, I think 18 or 19 schools we've met with over the last month, and we've talked to everybody through the process from here on in. I am much more confident we know exactly where we are now and what we need. And we are seeing some really interesting applications and expressions coming through, sometimes that don't actually cost a massive amount of money, but that could make a really big difference. And I'm happy to bring an overview of all those once we've gone through that right process and we've awarded sort of contracts. I'm happy to bring that here to explain what we are doing and where we are going to create those new units.
Yeah, I think that would be very, very, very helpful. Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Chelsea, thanks.
I just wanted to add on to what Ben was saying around the expressions of interest. The reason we approached all of our providers within West Northants was to try and move away from the ad hoc approach, because what was happening was an officer would go to a school, the school would put forward an interest, it would come back to the authority to progress, and it wasn't a fair playing field, because it was whoever put forward then had the opportunity to have some capital investment. So what we wanted to do was approach everyone, invite them to put forward their proposals, and then link that in with the sufficiency plan that we now have to ensure that all schools are treated fairly.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think the approach that you're taking is absolutely the right approach, absolutely the right approach. I think there's probably in the school community just the frustration of it was expected that there would be, on the back of that, there would be a plan that would then move forward at pace, because we know the issues that we've got here and they've been there for some time. But as Ben's highlighted there, when you came to January in your sufficiency, there seemed to be a mismatch in what you thought you knew and what you started to realise you actually didn't know. That's when it's got held up. But I think the schools community will have confidence if we see now continuous action moving forward. And this isn't something that those of us who sat in schools forum for some years, prior to West Northants existing, we had an appalling situation that was getting worse with NNC, with, again, the schools community went through pilot studies or announced pilot studies that never amounted to anything. So it's kind of something that year after year after year, we've seen deficits going up, promises of things, and then it just really not happening, and schools trying to pick up the pieces in between. But I, like you, Ben, have got confidence that we have got everyone working in the right direction now. And is there anything you'd like to add just further on the impact of the investments you made so far, and particularly around the special school, which I think opens September?
As part of the demand management and sufficiency, that number 2 on the 4 programmes, what we'll be able to do is identify, obviously not individual children, but identify average costs for pupils going to Tiffield, for example, compared to the average cost of where they would have gone if Tiffield didn't exist. And that for me is the difference between a recovery plan and a deficit, is cost avoidance, a lot of that. So typically 45 pupils go in there in September, on average they cost X. Without that, most of them would have gone out of county and they would have cost Y. That's the saving. We will have that at individual project level, and then we'll aggregate that up to those overall programmes. So I'm happy to bring that in the autumn. Obviously not going through the detail of individual pupils. You won't be surprised, that's where we make a big difference. And sorry, Chair, last bit on that. The funding panel that I mentioned that meets weekly, one of the things we were not doing at all historically was looking at the total cost of provision. One of the biggest bits there now is transport. So no request can come through that panel, or no request will get agreed through the panel until it identifies Tiffield will cost X plus transport, which costs that. Well, that's the total package compared to the Outer Hebrides with a plane every day equals X. We're able to really compare then the true costs. And that's actually thrown us sometimes. We have ended up agreeing on private provision sometimes because the overall package is much cheaper, because the nearest maintained school or the nearest mainstream school might end up costing us more in taxis than it costs us to actually fund a school. So we do look at all of the provision costs at the moment before we make those decisions. That panel is, people don't like it because it's pretty brutal. And if the evidence isn't there, the answer is no. So it's really driving up the quality of requests and the quality of applications. And Chair, we've had this discussion before. That's the same panel that reviews any RAS reviews or any requests for reviews around RAS funding as well. There's a real rigour in that panel at the moment. And it's not the bane of my life. I do enjoy it. It just takes a long time.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone. I think that was a good debate around that subject. So if I can move us on then to agenda item 8, Beth, the administration arrangements.
Thank you. Sorry for it's very mundane in comparison to this. Is housekeeping really. We have to bring the administrative arrangements for the allocation of central government grants to Schools Forum members each year. Schools Forum members are requested to give a view on these arrangements if they wish, and also to feedback to their governing bodies on these arrangements. So the majority of our grant comes to us through the DSG, and we aim, as with all grants, to pass that on to schools and providers in the same way that it comes to us. So for the majority of our schools block funding, that comes to us with a 12% for the first payment and then 8% each month following. So that's how we pass it on to our maintained schools. For most other grants, I should add that most grants for academies go direct to academies from the government. So most of the local funds that we hold are for our maintained schools, not with all, but most of our grants. So then the other grants that tend to come to us at a particular point in the year tend to be on the last day of the month, and we then pay the following month. Steve and my team's put this table together, the appendix, which shows lists the majority of the grants that we receive and pass on. They do seem to be expanding each year, and the sort of complications around them as to which sector they go to expands each year. A lot of the grants that are rolled in for the primary schools and secondary schools don't get rolled in for the special schools and alternative provision and remain separate. So there's quite a depth and complicated picture in that table, which I think captures it well. Not a lot of changes, nothing significant for 25-26. Any kind of changes in the pay elements, from increases in things like national insurance or pensions, that tends to come to us now as a separate grant with various names. Additional core schools budget grant, teachers pay and pension grant, additional supplementary, they all seem to come each year now with a different name, and then the following year they get rolled into the base grant, and then a new grant comes for whatever inflation happens in that year. So we're seeing that year on year, and yeah, I don't think there's anything else really. Happy to take any questions on those. We have had confirmation of PE and sports premium continuing for primary schools, but I don't think the rates have actually been published yet. I haven't checked today. Happy to take any questions on those arrangements.
I've just got one question coming through. I've gone through the tables. Have the grants, historically, the grants obviously are slower to get rolled into when it comes to post-16 funding and early years in terms of teachers' pay and pension grants. Have they been rolled in now, or are you expecting those elements to continue?
I'm not so familiar with post-16, I'm afraid, but for early years, they do get rolled in each year now. Right. And that's part of the analysis that we do, is with the tables that show the year-on-year movements, is we have to try and show a separate line in the early years as well as we do for the primary and secondary schools to take that into account. I'm looking at Thomas because I'm not sure about the situation in the kind of post-16 funding with those grants.
It wasn't in the, I didn't see it in the table, that's why I mentioned it.
I'll have a look.
Yeah, if you could have a look at that one.
Yeah,
I haven't got any other questions. Is any questions from forum? Okay, if we're happy to accept that, then Beth, would you like to talk to us about Scheme for Financing Schools?
Yeah, it'll take 2 seconds. It's just to say that there are no directed revisions from government, so the old Scheme for Financing Schools will just roll forward for 25-26.
Okay, then we'll move on to item 10, then schools and early year funding consultations process.
Yeah, so we were just going to basically propose that we follow the same process as we have done for the previous financial years. So bring in a draft consultation to the October forum for both the schools funding consultation and the early years funding consultation, to consult throughout November with a vote in December. So I think we will have difficulties again this financial year, because the government have confirmed now that we're not going to get a provisional settlement in July. So similar to last year, again, whereas in previous years we get a provisional settlement. So I think they're going to give us some information in the autumn And I expect that we'll get the published allocations in December as usual, which will make it quite difficult again to illustrate sort of the exact impact on schools as part of the consultation.
This will impact us, and to have that meaningful consultation. My understanding, I spoke to one of the deputy directors responsible for funding at the DFE last Thursday. They were talking about October.
Yes, I think they were going to announce some high level sort of principles. I think they're going to publish the same document as they did last year around sort of the sort of factors within the formula, but no sort of actual amount. So we've obviously got the Chancellor's statement that she made last month, upon which we can sort of base estimates on what sort of the general increase in percentage might be, but it's quite tricky sort of with those estimates because of all of the grants that are rolled in, not rolled in, the additional NI grant that we've received this year. It's quite difficult to then compare the baselines. So we can sort of perhaps look at doing some estimates, but again, I probably wouldn't want to hang my hat on those estimates.
No, I think it's going to have to be, the consultation will have to be on principle rather than on figures. And the other one that's unusual from the point of view of these other grants, with the NIC grant, is the first payment of that isn't until September, and October into schools, which is, they normally do the 5/12, 7/12 thing, but they haven't this time round. I did speak again to the department about that and asked them why they hadn't done that, and the nearest thing to an excuse I could get was just timing with different funding streams coming out, and that was the earliest they could program it in.
Yeah, because that was announced quite late, wasn't it?
Yeah,
because that was promised in, I think, February or something.
Yes.
But it was quite late again. I think there was a little bit of glimmer of hope in, I think that it was one of their sort of announcements earlier this week, that we possibly could get a multi-year funding settlement, which would allow us to plan a bit more into the future, sort of rather than sort of what we've had previous years, where we've just had sort of the year sort of they just announce it each year, so it doesn't really allow for that sort of planning.
No. Well, that would make a difference if they do it.
Yeah. But again, as Ben was saying earlier, it's again difficult to predict what it's going to be because we don't know sort of changing policies that are going to be coming out. But I would have thought they'd have to phase those kind of things in as well.
Well, I think that's why there is part of the reason there is that delay is because they want to get out the send new proposals for send in September, and then they'll follow it with this is what the funding will follow after. So my understanding is that's why they're teeing it up later. But
and in the background, we've obviously got the local government funding consultation, which is ongoing currently, and I think as part of that, sort of there's a few questions on some of the formulas, more to do with sort of children and family grants, which obviously helps to support some of the family help work that's going on, but also around the statutory override, and sort of looking to local authorities on sort of how we'd fix the problem of the multi-billion-pound national deficit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Is there any other questions for family on that? No.
Actually, Paul.
Yes, please.
Notwithstanding what you've said about it's not going to be figures, it's going to be more about principle. When we go out to consult with schools, we always get a really poor feeding back. I'm not sure what we can do to start thinking about how we engage more head teachers, notwithstanding, as Paul said, it's going to be probably more difficult because it is more principle rather than figures. Whether SIPs can get involved in sort of reminding heads, etc. Thank you.
Really, I agree. Sadly, we get a really poor response rate, and I do understand why. If you get 10% survey response back anyway, you're doing okay. But we want more, other than, I don't know, offering vouchers at the end of it, or a beer with Eliza to anyone that responds, or so. I don't know, but I think all of us need to try and encourage our colleagues, and because we want to hear everybody's voice, and this is your opportunity to have it. And the irony is, I'm saying this, and Rachel's not in the room because I was mainly going to look at Rachel. We know we regularly get a very low response from early years providers. We understand why. Anything that Rachel and colleagues can do in early years, I know they already do a brilliant job. We need to try and incentivise it and push it more. So, John, you're absolutely right.
Thank you. Oh,
Sorry, can I just raise that from my point of view, it'd be about the impact. So it's the fact that by filling in this form, yeah, absolutely, chuck me a 20 quid at my Amazon voucher and I'm right there. But it's that impact that if I know by filling this in and completing this, this is what's going to happen and this is what will change. Whereas, we all get so many forms to fill in and so many, feedback mechanisms that you just don't see the results of. Whereas this is one that actually, by doing this, you can see a direct impact within 12 months.
So for the Rachel's going to do all that work. Now she's back in the room. Is that right? We nominate Rachel. We said very nice things about you while you were out. I promise.
I'm sure you did. Sorry, I've just come in on the back of that, but I think I'll always be honest. I think the issue is with these consultations is those providers who have submitted the consultations and then we get the results of it and the results are always shit. Sorry. So I shouldn't say that. I'm really sorry. I'm live on YouTube. And I think it's really frustrating for providers. So it gets to the point where what's the point in me filling something in when I'm not even going to get the result that I want when I put in for the consultation?
Right. So the conversation we started while you were out was, how do we get more people to respond? Because we want more people to respond. And Louise's, I think, really good point was, you've got to be able to show the impact of responding to what could happen. This group makes decisions about hundreds of millions of pounds a year, and it can influence where that goes, how that gets prioritised, etc. So we've got, I think, on all of it, we've got to do something to incentivise and promote. Actually, every person does have a voice. It's really important to do it. And I know we've talked before about having those joint sessions and those for early years providers or for schools, etc. Through every avenue we can, we should promote it.
I think there is part of the early years that we don't get a vote on, though. And I think that's really frustrating because whilst in schools, there's much more of a voice, in early years, there's not. And I think we've been restricted, particularly on capital expenditure, and I think, look, we're talking historic and I know that we want to go forward. But I think, unfortunately, people, in our sector are still struggling that, we're not getting any services within, that is starting to change and I'm definitely seeing that, but we're not actually getting services and support from central expenditure. 4% of my money, essentially, or, children's money is going to that and we're not seeing any of that support. And I think that's continually a frustrated point from the sector.
Hear the frustration, but also know I'm hearing the positive bit within that as well. And I know Rayhana and her colleagues are doing a really, really good job there. It's still got to be felt more widely. That's my interpretation of that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So with that, at that next meeting, when we go through, or when we talk about the consultations, that's we can look at, and I know you will have looked at before that, how we go out into the market again and how we get those, try and improve the response rate, but equally how we can apply the lessons learned from previous consultations, as Rachel has just mentioned, on retention factors. And I know previously Ray has done a lot more work than probably we've had previously, but I think we need to look very closely at that, very closely at those voices that we've had, and make sure that we're listening and as we said, making sure the money is going out where it's needed. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Forward plan, James.
Thank you, Chair. As set out on the agenda, a particular point to highlight though is Forum is scheduled to meet on the 9th of December 2025, which is actually possibly the most important meeting of the year, given when it takes decisions on the budget. Unfortunately, it won't be able to do so in this venue. It's being used for a planning inquiry, which rather takes up the available facilities. There are no other WNC venues that support webcasting available on that date, so it would be useful to have a steer from the forum how it wishes to proceed. And the options could be to make the meeting on 9th of December online only, or to consider changing the date for that 9th of December meeting at about to something as close as possible to that time, recognising that if the meeting's moved any earlier, that causes complications with the timeline for the consultation, and if it's moved any later, you're starting to get towards the very end of the winter term. So, having presented you with a difficult choice, it's open to forum, really.
Okay, so that is, unfortunately, that is the one meeting, obviously, where a lot of decisions are based on the back of. Now, the only, the big unknown we've got, obviously, is the funding. So the things that we're trying to discuss, we're not entirely certain how much information we will have on what our funding rates are. So to have those nailed on by them. But we're also backed up in given that the authority, and again, Emily Beth can confirm this, you've got to have your APT tool completed and all those decisions made in time for that information to go into that. And that's kind of a January-ish, 20th of Jan cutoff. So we've bookended with deadlines, really. In an ideal world, it's better, I think, to be face-to-face for that meeting with the decisions, but I'm certainly happy to run the meeting online if colleagues would like that. James, is it just that day that the unavailability, or is it that week that is tricky? If it was a day before or day after, would that?
We could certainly have the use of the council of this room on the day before, the 8th. I'm not the day after. So the options we were looking at as possibles where the room would be available were the day before, the 8th, or the following week, the 15th or the 17th.
Yeah, I think the 15th or 17th might be a bit late, but
Yeah,
what do you?
it'd be a bit late. Can we do the day before? Is everybody all right? Get it in now.
8th?
Yeah, we're fine with the 8th.
Nail that down.
It might just be a bit of a challenge to get the papers out on time because of the consultation ending at the end of November. We'll have to obviously pull together the responses and circulate the paper. I think it's about a week in advance.
Yeah, we're meant to give you a week in advance, but we'll probably have to just have a bit of leeway on that deadline.
It's only a day.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
even if you were a day
Yeah.
shorter,
Yeah.
getting it out.
But there's going to be so many millions of consultation responses to read through this time. Sorry, I'm being slow. Chair, I think that's brilliant result. Yeah, I'm really worried about the short paper because I'm conscious this is important, but so our Christmas plays, etc. They all have so many other people to make our schools. I think if we go the 8th,
That would be better. Yeah. Yeah.
So everybody's okay then with the papers coming out a day
Bit
later,
later.
because I think it would mean that the consultation would close at the end of November and we'd have to do the papers on the 1st. So if we circulate, yeah, a day later, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I raise one other request? If we fix the date, it was just around the forward plan. In October, I'd like to put an agenda item on around section 19 and a policy around section 19. And those requests that come into the council, our response, and then around funding as well. So we'll bring a proposal for colleagues to consider here, if that's okay. It's becoming there's a lot of requests at the moment. It's something that I think we need to provide some real clarity on our local position on. So I think it'd be useful to bring that through this group. Is that okay? Thank you.
Is there any other questions on the forward plan? Okay. Right, that's lovely. I haven't been informed of any other business. So it just remains for me to thank you again so much for all the work you've put in this year. This is our last meeting of the academic year. And to our officers who've provided the paperwork, the explanations throughout the year. And we've had some quite difficult discussions sometimes, particularly around high needs during the course of the year, and particularly with the changes that have came in September around the RAS bandings and the challenges of implementing that. And we've all come through that, sometimes scarred, but survived through those conversations. And as Ben said at the start of those, we'd started with 400 different funding plans and have rationalised them into a formal structure. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. It is greatly appreciated. It does make a difference to our communities in which we operate. And I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Paul, as well.